What you're about to hear is a conversation between myself and Ainjel Emme that I think is really a great conversation. We talk all the things music industry, the recording academy, vocal production, making mistakes in the music industry, being a runner in the music industry, being anti-establishment, and so many things on the creative journey. So stick around, buckle up, grab a drink, grab a popcorn, whatever the case is, or if you're on the treadmill running, listen to this, keep running and let's get into this. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto and I'm a musician from Northport, New York, and today we have the absolute pleasure of having Ainjel Emme here on the channel. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
Me too. Nice to finally meet you.
Likewise. So for people that aren't super familiar with you and your career and just your journey in the music industry, can you give a little bit of a backstory on who you are, how you got into the industry, and kind of just where you are today?
Absolutely. I started my career actually as a busking musician on the Venice Beach Boardwalk when I was a teenager, and parlayed that into had a couple bands, a little flirting with industry stuff, but I'm pretty famously anti-establishment. So I didn't go the route of signing a record deal. I kind of wanted to do things independently, so I put out an independent record, and through that started meeting people and getting more into engineering. I've been a home recordist this entire time. I had a little 4-track and all that, and I decided at a certain point I just wanted to move into being in the studio more, so I found some gigs as a studio musician. I got to do a couple really cool things. I got to be on a record with Pussifer. It's Maynard Keenan's project. He's probably the first big person to pull me into a project, and from there I just realized I didn't want to leave the studio ever again. So I started looking around for opportunities. I finished my second record with a friend of mine in his studio, and he kind of started teaching me some of the ropes, and then I moved over to a studio in Santa Monica called Threshold Sound and Vision, where I met two of my mentors, Todd Bergman and Peter Barker, and they kind of pulled me into the production house that they were running there, and I learned started as a studio runner and learned my way all the way up the chain. I moved over to Interscope Records from there as a runner, moved up a little bit, and I realized probably when I started assisting that I didn't really want to push two faders up and watch somebody work on their laptop.
Yeah.
So, because it's, I come from an analog background. I really love rock music and I love live instruments and stuff like that. And so the opportunity wasn't really there for me to grow that way. So I ended up connecting with my now husband, and he's kind of doing the same thing that I was. So we started building together. We started a little studio in his garage, and now we have a really beautiful studio out in Joshua Tree. And I get to work on amazing projects with amazing producers and engineers and artists, and that's what I'm doing now.
That's phenomenal. Really great story. I mean, just looking at the view of your studio is you got a ton of analog gear, and it's just as it's beautiful, man. It's funny, like. It's interesting the conversations that I've had with these interviews. Like, people kind of have two different schools. Like some people stick analog, some obviously, where some people stick with the digital and stuff. But it's interesting to hear. I have been surprised with the amount of like industry professionals that have moved over to digital. Where I'd be like, this guy worked on Kanye's album and he did it all digitally, and I was like floored by it. You know what I mean? I just could because you assume growing up in the industry, or growing up wanting to be in the industry, you see the typical studio pictures with the Neve 32 console,
right?
And that's what you expect, and you expect what's on the radio is you need all this gear to do it, and it's fascinating. So it's also, but it's funny as a recording artist myself. There is something that makes you just drool over all the analog gear that software in the box stuff doesn't do. So you see it,
you can touch it.
Yeah, see it. I guess as a musician, where I like to play and touch and feel and have an analog synth over here. Like there's something about twisting the filter on here is very different than twisting the filter on your computer with your mouse.
Yeah,
so there is something very
kinetic experience.
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely, while analog gear is a little bit out of my budget at the moment. I do definitely appreciate what just what it offers, even just as a tactical point of view.
Sure. Actually, a lot of our gear is built by my husband. He's a builder. Yeah, his name's Anthony Paul Lopez. He's also a fantastic mixing engineer, amazing drummer. These are old Collins that he built into a chassis. He built this LA2A. He built these two 176s. This is a little Frankenstein, little PM 1K over here, which is like the Japanese Neve. Like he's over the pandemic, he kind of earned his own electrical degree at home and is making stuff now. So we wouldn't have this amazing gear without all the work that he does. So
Sure. No,
yeah.
that's it's cool, and I just as soon as you turn the camera, I'm like it's automatically drawn to it. It's so cool. So I want to piggyback off of what you were talking about because you have a great story, and I appreciate the anti-establishment of it in the sense of like as somebody I think that there's a couple different schools of thoughts again with the music industry and just like anything. I kind of feel like some people maybe should go the record label route, and some people I think aren't meant to, in the sense of I think it depends on your personality type and what who you are, and kind of knowing who you are as a person. Like me, I love business just in general. So like I
Right.
don't really feel the need to want to go to a record. I want to do it independently essentially.
Sure.
But some people like don't know a dollar from a dime and could probably use the help of some extra establishment. But I'm curious. I want to hear a little bit more about your anti-establishment, but also how that ended up going to Interscope, because that is a pretty big establishment,
Yeah, it is.
and just that transition.
You know, I have some ethical issues with the entertainment industry, and it's hard because I grew up in it, and there's so many good people in it. So I'm not going to be like sitting here
Sure,
glorifying the
absolutely,
industry itself. There's always bad apples in any bunch. It's
absolutely.
it's a human thing. But having started my career as a teenager, I was privy to some really bad behavior. It was the 90s, especially, so it was really, really toxic and frankly terrifying. I had some bad experiences with some very groomy A&R types. And when you look at how children are worked in this industry, it's no wonder that they fall apart in their 20s. Like, we have child labor laws for a reason. I think that should continue to extend to apply even
Mm,
to our young
yeah,
actors and
yeah,
musicians in the industry because
sure.
it's not healthy. And then when you look at the history of how entertainment has exploited artists and all of that, I just don't feel like the working model is something I want to participate in. And I've spent my life trying to build outside of that so that there is infrastructure on the fringe for people who don't feel
Sure.
comfortable. Now, if you are 100% like entertainer, you want the big audiences, you want to have that experience, you feel really comfortable in the spotlight, you don't mind being commodified and all of that stuff,
Mm.
then go for it. I'm not a hater, but the majority of artists and musicians don't really want to have that kind of experience in their life. So
That's a really interesting phrase difference, entertainer versus artist. I don't know if you did that consciously, but like, I think that there are some people that just want to be an entertainer and they don't necessarily totally care about the craft as much, and that's fine.
well, I mean, that's its own form of artistry,
Absolutely,
arguably.
sure, sure, sure. It's just
I
it's
mean, you look at somebody like
different, yeah.
Prince, and but Prince was also very much decried the industry, and he did a lot of subversive stuff that people are only now kind of going like, oh, that's why he did this,
Yeah, yeah,
trying to get out of his label deal or whatever,
yeah,
So,
exactly. He also recorded all
yeah,
his own music too, right?
yeah. Him and he worked with some amazing people, including Susan Rogers, who's one of my absolute heroes. I had an opportunity to moderate a panel with her on it, and she's just an absolute legend. She's working in the field of psychoacoustics
Hmm.
now, and it's
Psychoacoustics, very
yeah,
interesting.
that's one of my favorite fields.
I don't know what that is.
It's basically the study of how sound affects the brain and how resonances work and all of
Hmm.
that stuff. So I do a lot of actually I do a ton of psychoacoustic work in my vocal production and the engineering stuff that I do. So
Really, I would love
yeah,
that. Can you elaborate on how you do so?
I do a lot of like creating subliminal elements that you don't hear as much in vocal productions, where like you exploit whisper frequency, where you take really, really background throws, where you put loops under stuff so it carries. It's really like you could go down a rabbit hole with it, but it's basically going in and taking the elements that aren't as prominent, but using that to fill the
Sure.
backspace so that you're getting this energetic movement that kind of influences and tickles your brain a little bit.
Yeah, it's very interesting. After you elaborate, it totally makes sense. So, I'm sure the ASMR space is tremendous in the psychoanalysis and why certain things trigger certain things. And yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very
And we all
interesting.
kind of gravitate towards it, even if you don't realize you're doing it when you do a throw,
Yeah.
like a reverb throw or one of those things. That's all ear catching candy
Yeah, ear
stuff.
candy, absolutely.
Yeah.
An industry term for sure. Absolutely. So now, I want to kind of stay on this for a second before we kind of go a little, pivot. just the whole anti-establishment. I read somewhere. I only saw it on. I was doing research, before our conversation, and I read somewhere, but I didn't see it on multiple things. So I want to clarify. Did I read that you were a Recording Academy voter?
Yeah.
So okay, so that I think that's very cool, and I'd love to hear more about that. But two, I'd like to hear kind of typically the Recording Academy goes again very establishment. So that's kind of why I'm curious about that. Like that perked my. I was going to bring it up later on, but I figured I'd bring it up now because we're still talking anti-establishment. Because a lot of artists today are crying out against the Recording Academy or the Grammys, saying, like it's whatever whatever the artist is saying. But I'm just
Yeah.
curious, what your take on that.
For me, I think that representation is really important. And my perspective represents the indie community and the engineers that I work with and the people that I work with in the field that don't have these access opportunities.
Hmm.
I get a lot of requests for consultation on things like diversity and inclusion, equity stuff, and what the real problems are facing people on the street level, which I stay very close to that. So I think it's important to have a seat at the table that represents that. And I'm in
Absolutely.
a position at this point, I've accomplished enough to have a position at the table. And so I feel like it's kind of my responsibility to try to show up. I mean, I still am, ask anybody who knows me, I'm awful. I go into these little holes of work and play that I don't come out of for, months at a time. But I
Sure.
do try to show up with what I have to offer and give that openly back to the community.
Yeah. Essentially, the to whom much is given, much is required kind of thought process.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So, what does that process even look like, though? Like, how do you get a seat at the table? Like, what does a seat at the table look like?
At the position that I'm in, I'm just your layman voter. I have the ability to have access to the conversations that are going on and look at the work that the academy is doing, and to be fair, there are a lot of people with their feet on the ground doing great work in the recording academy that are trying to do things to protect and boost our community. So
Hmm.
it's not fair to say that it's all like the Grammys is one thing. It's a any award show, it's all just like let's celebrate ourselves. It's a little bit,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like you kind of can't be too mad at that. It's political. It is what it
Sure.
is.
Like everything else, man.
Yeah, and to let that be like your focus and to let that
Sure.
pull you into a negative view of the industry, I think is really dismissive of a
Hmm.
lot of work that people do,
Oh, absolutely.
in the best interest of all of us,
Absolutely.
So really, it's just the Recording Academy voters. Basically, what we do is we have categories that we can vote in. Like, you can't like vote on every single thing. You have to choose what like you're kind of specialized in. I'm part of the P&E wing, obviously, so I tend to focus on recording, production, stuff like that. And then I vote in the major categories that, like pop and rock that I participate in as
Hmm.
a producer and engineer.
How many voters are there? Like a lot?
A
Yeah.
lot. I
Yeah.
couldn't I couldn't qualify that.
Yeah. I don't know anything about it, so I find it pretty fascinating, actually.
I mean, it's not as hard as you would think to become a voting member. I mean, there's obviously fees that you pay. There's a requirement list that you have to go through, but really it has to do with if you have credits, published credits and stuff like that, and you are demonstrably working within the business, it's not in anyone's interest to you out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And like you have to show that you have actual stake in the community, and enough experience to be speaking from somewhere relevant.
Sure. Absolutely. Makes total sense. Absolutely. And I appreciate your perspective of wanting to have a seat at the table to make a difference. I think is really cool.
Somebody's got to do
I
it.
hear that 100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, continue. Can you? I would like to kind of backtrack a little bit to, the your times at Interscope. But I think you mentioned you were somewhere else before Interscope. I like to talk about like kind of the grassroots starting of the runners and stuff. And I think that's kind of overlooked because I think that so many people, myself included, sometimes can say, "Oh, I want to be there," but you don't see all the steps that people took to get there. And it's a humbling position, being a runner. And I've had a couple of conversations with people that, have done really great things in the music industry, but a lot of them started in a similar position where it's like they got coffee and clean toilets. And like, it's a humbling position. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. You know what I mean? So I'd love just to hear, your perspective and just kind of like the journey of, because it's so easy to gloss over, be like, oh yeah, I was a runner for whatever, how long. And then, so like, I kind of want to hear a little bit of the nitty gritty kind of thing, just to kind
I
of give people
actually
perspective.
I still love assisting and I will run if it's necessary.
Sure.
I think that here's the thing about being kind of studio assistant RSA like runner. You have to understand every element and component working in the room to be good at that job. You have to be able to anticipate wordlessly what's going on. You have to pay really, really close attention. It gets you very, very dialed in. And you see like kind of the machination of everything from, the producer down all the way to you. You're very responsible for being aware of all of those levels. And so from that position, you have a keen observation point where if you're really sharp and you pay attention, you can learn a lot. So
Mm.
I actually think that everyone who wants to be like a very, if you want to climb up to the high level, you have to start from the bottom. And case in point, the boss at the time of Interscope, Jimmy Iovine, he started his career because John Lennon liked him because he was getting him coffee. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this industry, especially if you're working in engineering, requires such a huge degree of humility that if you can't gracefully pull off the RSA position, you're
Mm.
probably going to be very niche at best
Mm.
because
So
it's a
why do you say
service
that the
industry.
whole it's a service and yeah, exactly. I think that
Yeah,
answers it. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Your ego
it's
kind of dies at the door, especially as like an engineer or producer when
but
you're
it needs
hired for
to.
some. Yeah, absolutely. Because
It needs to, because if you come in with too much ego, you lose perspective of what the potential
yeah,
of a piece of work could be
yeah,
because you're only going to see it through the lens of what pleases you. And you
yeah,
have to be able to, I mean, I struggle with that still, being able to go into spaces that I might not understand at first, and it might take me a while to get my head
yeah.
around it. But when I pull my ego out of it,
Exactly.
I'm open,
Especially
and you
because
need
you're
to be
bringing
open.
clients in that have a vision,
Yeah,
so accepting their vision sometimes can be, if you disagree, but that's kind of your job at the point, like
yeah,
accepting their vision, and of course, you can guide or elaborate on their visions and stuff, but like it's really
right,
it's their project, their name's being attached
right.
to it more so than
Well,
anything
and there
else.
will be clients that need the hand holding and
Sure.
want you to lead them. And there are clients that are very firm in their direction, and you
Hmm.
need to learn how to support them to best realize their vision. And the more you're capable of spanning that gamut, the better off you are. And that's why something like running, as simple as it is, it just really teaches you to take your ego out of the room
Hmm.
and be there to serve, which is, as an engineer, even as a producer, arguably, that's your job,
Yeah.
is to serve.
I would even argue to some degree that I think that somebody that started with the bottom and started with like you kind of pick up on things like you mentioned that you don't necessarily if you kind of skip a couple steps, and I think you can kind of almost see in conversation with somebody if you have two people in the room and one kind of you kind of started at the very bottom, learned all those kind of intricacies and how to handle clients or how to do this or how to do that, or just recognize like reading the room that
Yeah,
what do they call it, the EQ, the emotional intelligence, right?
yeah,
Like just
yeah,
learning conversation, people's tones, and as opposed to somebody that kind of skipped a couple steps and went from like doing nothing to like now you're kind of like mid tier. It's like you can kind of vibe the difference of like, this guy doesn't totally get it, or like this guy
right.
gets it. It's just a
Yeah.
weird like people thing that you kind of pick up on.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a huge range of neurodiversity as well in our field because a lot of people who are I'm actually neurodiverse myself, so people like with autism, with ADHD, they
Sure,
gravitate towards the spectrum, and we have lots to learn
sure,
in the social field. So,
sure.
that's another challenge.
Yeah,
There's always going to
absolutely.
be challenges,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but you do it's a great place actually to learn those skills
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you have to
Exactly.
reading the room is the paramount thing that you should know how to do. It's listening and observing,
Yeah.
paying attention, and being able to process that data and turn it into something productive.
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. Pivoting a little bit to some of the work that you've done on, I was getting a little research on the discography and the credits and everything. I saw that you worked on an Overcoats album. Funny story is like a year and a half ago, I had them on for an interview. Like just had a conversation. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like just the small world in the music industry.
Yeah, amazing girls, those two.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
incredibly talented for sure. But did you do vocal production on that?
Yeah, I did some editing and some mix preparation. I
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of that for other producers because it's just work that I can really dive into. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm friggin' exhausted. I've had my hands in every aspect of this project. Please
Yeah,
help me.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
So,
yeah.
so can you elaborate for people that aren't super familiar with the industry and what that necessarily means? Can you elaborate on that aspect of the editing and the vocal production and stuff? For example, like Ali and AJ or an Overcoats or Blue to Tiger, like you get sent stems or how does so elaborate on that?
Every project is different. It depends on need. I'm a really strong editor, especially of vocals. I'm really good at making great comp choices and doing stuff that sounds really natural and learning how to or knowing how to judge things to still have that human component
Mm,
without just going full auto tune on grid I'm very manual with my process when I'm Melodyne editing. I'm very, very manual, and I'll actually comp my Melodyne comp into the OG comp so that there's as little artifacting as possible. I do stuff like gentle timing of things so that they all kind of go with each other. I'll even kind of delatch things a little bit and detime to give a little bit more of a human feel.
Mm.
It's just very, I call it quantum engineering.
Yeah. See,
So
it.
stupid because it has nothing to do with that field, but it's very micro and
Yes.
has a huge impact on the overall feel of how things.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
incredibly, as somebody that does that for myself, it is incredibly tedious. So, in the sense of like that's, I could see why it's a totally different side of your brain. I would say,
Yeah.
that like than recording or even anything like that. It's more of like a technical side than the creative side, if I could say that. In the sense of like there's a
Yeah.
lot more thinking of the creative choice, or a lot more thinking of choices like the engineering style choices than necessarily the. But then again, you do have like the feel of the song.
Yeah, that's where I think I'm really lucky because I can't fully leave my creative brain
Yeah,
ever, which is why I'm
yeah,
kind of more of a terrible
sure,
engineer, to be honest. I'm fine, but I consider myself more on the production side
sure.
and on the editor side, because I can make very judicious choices creatively,
Yeah.
that are informed by technicality.
It's really interesting. You just keeping on that topic. How sometimes, like you said, like the creative, it's so easy for an engineer. I heard this in a conversation once. Like sometimes we become too much of an engineer instead of or an engine. What was it? It was we forget to be an engineer. We become an engine eye, in the sense of like we're using our eyes way too much over our ears. And
Yes.
it's so interesting, like for example, vocal tuning or vocal timing. It's so easy to be like, oh, that's out of time. We got to fix that. But it sometimes sounds right, like you said, and it's just such an interesting. You need a level of disconnect to be like, no, that's okay. It sounds good.
Right. Well, you need to understand how to pull out and pull
Yeah,
back in and
yeah,
pull
yeah,
and honestly, when we're working on that like
yeah.
level,
Exactly.
it's really hard to
Yeah,
pull back, but you have to
yeah.
do that. I actually have, this is a tip that I try to pass on to everyone. I actually have one of my hot corners is my visualizer. So
Mm.
that when I'm listening to an edit, I just go to the visualizer and I cut the Pro Tools out of the window so that I'm not looking at it.
Wow, yeah, man, I
You
see that
know,
because sometimes you kind of just see things and you're like, oh, that's not right when it sounds fine, but like,
it sounds
visually,
fine. And you always have to like less is more. Less
mm,
is more. Unless it's like you have to do this like pitch perfect pop and it's just really far from that and you have to be really gridded about it. And then like I said, you can delatch a little bit afterwards. Like
hmm,
if you want to do your snap to grid and then just pick it apart, you can do stuff like
yeah,
that. But I do believe that manual is the best approach and you
sure.
always want to return to the original and really listen critically at that point and then bring in what needs to be changed and leave the rest alone.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, as an typical analog user, what is your typical like, chain that you're using for production, for vocal production, or just
Oh,
recording
for
production?
my husband built me an M49 clone. So the M49 is my favorite mic by Neumann. It's a classic. It's the Aretha Franklin
Yeah.
mic. It can handle some pretty big SPL if it needs to. And it has that broadcast vibe and
Mm.
curve to it that every single voice sounds good on. So for the most part, I'm using an M49, usually into a 1073 style preamp. I love the LA2A, but I have to say that these right here, these 176s are juice. So I've found myself using those a lot of the time.
So, if you're doing a lot of like pre in the box stuff, what does your typical in the box session look like? Like, is it pretty ready to go once like the raw recording's there? Is it kind of already the completed recording?
I
How
think
much
every
tweaking do you do?
Right. I think every recordist should aim to your capture should sound as close as you can get it to your mix.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's going to be level stuff, there's going to be stuff that you can't do, and you don't want to overly EQ things to the point where when you bring the music in, now stuff's being masked because you did too much EQing. You
Mm.
want to have a lot of the full picture first.
Yeah.
So you want that to just sound good standalone. And then when you bring things in, you carve away at various frequencies to make everything, you
Mm-hmm.
know. That I love working in the box. I do a lot of that as well. I started in the box. I only had these little tiny two guys right here. They're old Bellari preamp and compressor
Yeah.
from like the mid 90s. And I used to have that with a little 8-track reel to reel recording machine, and and then when I moved into digital, I just had an interface, and I ran these into the interface and did everything in the box in Logic.
Mhm.
So
Oh, Logic user, fellow y'all. Are you still using
um,
Logic, or did
on
you
the
switch
Pro
to the Pro
Tools
Tools?
gal now, but I
Oh,
do
okay.
use Logic as necessary, and I started there. So digitally, I started there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I learned on Logic 15 years ago, and then just kind of
Yeah,
like it was one of those things where like I've been doing it for so long, I don't really kind of want to learn something new, kind of thing. And
I get it.
it hasn't really caused a problem yet. I'm not
It's
in studios enough where it's like I'm transferring files. I do a lot of my own stuff, so it's like it hasn't been a problem yet. So we'll see how things go. But
it's a perfectly good DAW. There's nothing wrong with Logic. It's just the editing workflow in Pro Tools works so much better for how I do my work, and it's
mhm.
also just infinitely configurable, like
Yeah,
configurable. So you can, there's three ways to do almost anything in Pro Tools. So you find your way
yeah,
and you can do it like that. And you can just like speed through things where I
yeah.
feel like Logic is very one way.
Sure. Which makes it then, if as you're relearning something, like when there's three different ways to do the same thing, you're like, wait, I thought that was the way you did,
Yeah,
So
it's taken a while. I've been on my
yeah.
Pro Tools journey for about 7 years,
Okay.
something like that. I recently got certified.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, through Immersive and Inclusive Audio, who is Leslie Gaston Bird's company. She's doing amazing equity work, getting people who are not as well represented in engineering and education.
Very cool.
So shout out to Leslie.
Yeah. Now, I love all the I don't know how you define. I want to say almost activist stuff in the music industry. Is that a fair term? You're
I'd say
pro.
it's equity work. Yeah.
Okay. I think that so many people, especially in the actually I would say in any industry, but especially in like the creative industry, it's very me myself and I oriented. Where it's like
Hmm.
what how especially gosh especially as a New Yorker, the couple times that I've been to LA, LA is beautiful, but I do feel even more so. Everybody's like, what can I get from this situation? Where New York, I don't necessarily feel that vibe as much.
Well, New York, you have to live with a certain degree of social cooperation to even survive there, don't
Yeah,
you?
I guess that's fair. Yeah, yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
LA, you can very easily fall into your own bubble, but I mean, it's
Mm.
a the
So
unfortunate thing
yeah.
about our industry is that we are operating almost always at a scarcity mentality, where everyone's trying to survive and everyone's willing to undercut. There's no union, which there's conversations of that right now that are really amazing going on about unionizing. I worry that it won't ever happen because people are too willing to undercut somebody else to get the gig, or some people are a little bit more privileged and have the advantage of having the gear and they don't have to take the rate to try to pay for all the, hundreds of thousands of dollars they have to take out in debt to get all of the studio stuff,
Yeah,
that they so
yeah. No, it's a very interesting conversation, but I appreciate that because it's refreshing to hear. So many people are so me, myself, and I, where hearing conversation with people that are a bit more outwardly focused, I think is really important and
yeah,
really
and there's a lot of
refreshing.
that in the engineering community
Yeah,
too. I mean, none of us would get to where we are without somebody else
yeah, it's true.
helping us get there.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the collaboration between you and your husband. You said you guys work together a lot in the sense of, so if you could elaborate on that, I think it'd be really cool to hear.
We actually met on a studio gig. I was playing bass and he was playing drums, and we had a fun time. And a little while later, I ended up being poached for this band to play kind of the ancillary, like keys, guitar, background vocals kind of thing, and he was the drummer. So
Oh,
we
cool.
ended up we ended up in a band together for about a year, and during that time we got to know each other, and then I got to see the band that he was in on the side that like wasn't his work project, but was like his passion project. And I loved them. They were called The Absolute. And I loved all the members of the band. And so we all became thick as thieves. And he was kind of starting his engineering journey too. He was producing and engineering the band stuff. And I was working at Interscope and
Hmm.
doing all of that stuff. So we did a lot of commiserating. After we started dating, we both wanted to do this full time, and so we both put everything all in and started building. And my brother-in-law, Charlie, he works in film, but he's hugely responsible for helping us grow into an actual functioning business because
Hmm.
he's the one that's really business minded. I'm absolutely the worst business person. I'm full creative, wooey brain, always floating around with ideas, but it's really hard for me to put my feet on the ground and be like
Hmm.
spreadsheets.
Hmm.
I'm not that gal.
Sure, sure.
So um, Anthony, actually, my husband, he played drums on some of my stuff, and we just kind of we overlap really nicely where we have this wonderful cross section of where we both do the same thing, and then he goes out this way and I go out this way, and it just, he's one of those people that just is, there are people that are just born engineers,
Hmm.
just through and through. They love it. It lights them up. Their understanding of how everything works is just like so inherent, that as to be like, oh, you just know this, like you were born
Yeah,
knowing this. And
for sure.
he's one of those engineers. And I'm one of those people who just, I can hear a song and play it back. I have that kind of ear
Hmm.
and that kind of scope. So the two of us together, we do some really awesome collaborating.
No, that's really cool. I especially appreciate that the husband wife duo. I think that's also again a little hard to maintain. So
Yeah.
I think it's really cool when it's actually functioning properly and functioning
I
well.
mean, it's like anything in a marriage, it's work,
Sure,
and we're really good
absolutely.
communicators and we really respect each other. And those are the two things I think that, make it work the most. Because I'm not going to say it's not challenging. There are definitely times, because taste wise, we can also be very, very
Sure,
different.
sure,
And when it's your spouse, like that's where it's hard to keep the ego out of the room, because
sure,
you don't want your spouse to ever be displeased with you or to feel like
sure.
you're combative or to like poo poo on their
Hmm.
ideas, you know what I mean? So but in that, I think that just makes us stronger because we
Yeah,
really have to continue to be professional while being loving to each other, which is
yeah,
like, that's the best kind of relationship with anybody. I
yeah,
love with my artists, I'm professional, but I am loving also. I'm your friend, and I want you to be able to emotionally meet me fully where you
yeah,
are, because that's where I'm going to get the best
yeah.
of you, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. The communication part is incredibly important. In any relationship, but also, even with working with clients, communication is so important. And learning, a very 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 cheesy thing that I learned when I was like 6 years old from my mother was, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it meanly. And it's harder, easier said than done.
Oh
It's
yeah.
very easy to kind of, especially again when your ego slips in. It's like, no, but my name's attached to this too. So if it sounds terrible now, it's also my name attached. So it's really easy to let that insecurity, I guess would be the right word for it, to kind of pop up in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where it's such a unique problem that we have,
Mm,
because even when you're just turning the knobs, there's an essence of you in there.
sure,
And
absolutely,
and some people are really able to not be invested and just be like, whatever the outcome is what it is, and that's really, really wonderful. I have not gotten there yet. I have emotional stake in every single
sure.
thing I do, which is
Passion,
fraught.
yeah,
It's not the best way to operate, but it's also, you know, I like to think of the sensitivity that I have. I want to understand how to use it as a tool and not
mm-hmm,
a weapon against
mm-hmm,
myself. A
for
tool for
sure.
the project, not as a weapon against the project or myself.
Absolutely. I want to be respectful of your time, so I just want to ask a couple more questions. And but I do want to say, one, first of all, thank you very much for you taking your time. It's been a
Oh, my
great
pleasure.
conversation so
I
far.
love
Yeah.
what you're doing, Jacob. You have so much your heart is very apparent,
Thank
and
you.
so that's why I
I
wanted to speak
appreciate
with
that.
you. I see it.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you. For people watching this, as I mentioned in the original message, with this interview, um, I like to, my goal is to inspire other artists and stuff, in the sense of like, everybody says it's impossible to do anything in the industry. So that being said, for people that have, started to see, like, have success with what they're doing, I'd love to hear just a little bit about like how you would say, like, your quote unquote tips on how you got there, on the sense of like, people I think start out, they're like, okay, cool, I get what she did, but how did she get the gig at Interscope? How did she work with Ali and like Ali and AJ? There's almost like this interesting disconnect where people like, okay, I get that I can need to do the work, put in the time. I just don't know how to get the work. So I would love to hear a bit about your story, which is again going to be unique and not everybody's the same, but like kind of just touching on that aspect.
Well, I mean, the topmost rule is be good at what you do.
Mm,
Always be learning, always be ready to be humbled, always understand that even like you have something to learn from even the like stupidest person in the room. Okay. And that's a mentality that a lot of people don't go in with. Every single person you meet, and some people like low key will not let you know that they're a motherfucker and will just be watching you to see how you act. And if you're like just placating the big loud people in the room, you have to be observant, you have to be good at what you do. And I'm still working on this one myself. You have to really be humble and um understand where to defer and where to take the lead, which is, it's just, that's a lot of
Mm.
years of experience with people.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing to put yourself out there. Don't be exploited by
Mm.
people, but be willing to serve. You know, it's like I got called in to do a gig with Mark Howard at Henson Studios for Mustangs of the West, and that was a free gig. I
Mm.
wasn't getting paid to do that, but I had an opportunity to work with a legend and just
Sure.
watch how he worked and integrate that into my own experience. So if you
Sure.
have opportunities to serve, you don't necessarily have to be the best engineer, but if you can make a damn good cup of coffee and you know how to be like, oh, I'm noticing the mood's kind of flagging, probably people need food, maybe make a little inquiry to the assistant, be like, hey, do you think people are hungry? Like, I'd like to get, it's just a lot of observation and taking care of people.
Yeah.
If you take care of people in this business, they will take care of you. If you can not get like crushed and bitter and burnt out by the people that are going to step on you, because there's going to be like a million of those. If you can stay a beautiful dandelion growing
Yeah.
through the cement, then you're going to be fine.
Yeah. It is also very, very interesting to see how small the industry actually is. You know, that,
And
like,
don't forget it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So that being said, like, you make a good impression with somebody, and that somebody knows 50 other somebodies that, like, you know,
Right.
it's, and then you meet one of those other people, and they're like, it's just, it's everybody knows
I
everybody,
mean,
and
and
it's
you can have
so
a bad
interesting.
day. You can have a bad day and get triggered by something and be totally off, and you can blow your career. Like,
Sure. No
it's
pressure.
really
No pressure.
hard. You have to stay. One of my best friends taught me this word is equanimity. If you can be in a practice of equanimity, which is just allowing things to be as they are and not letting them affect you to the point where you get dysregulated, and you can stay focused on the goal, the solution,
Yeah.
and the way out of, if you don't want to be there, then that's going to be the sharpest tool in your
It
brush.
sounds very similar to, I don't, are you familiar with the Serenity Prayer?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I'm
the
20 years off of the alcohol and hard drugs.
Oh
So
wow, that's great! Congratulations, good for you.
thank
Yeah,
you.
so the Serenity Prayer, that God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things that I can.
Yeah. If I had my wallet, I'd pull my little thing out. I have the
Yeah,
serenity
that's amazing. Good
in
for
my
you.
wallet.
That's
Yeah.
great. One thing I like to, like, in conclusion, kind of one thing I like to ask everybody as one of the final questions is, where you are now in the industry. What is one thing you wish you knew when you first started out?
I wish I knew that it's more important that you make your mistakes and learn how to do that gracefully than trying to avoid making a mistake
Mm,
and not pushing yourself, to places where you could get if you were just willing to take that risk.
mm-hmm.
That's probably personally, I've seen it for myself. And as a woman, it's a little bit harder because there are so few opportunities in this industry that the pressure, we are not allowed to fall as much because there's already that inherent bias that, like, we're lucky if we even get in the door because we don't, how could we know how to do this kind of stuff? It's changed a lot, thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
but when I started out, I was screamed out of a couple of rooms for
Mm-hmm.
just saying something. So, I think a lot of us, especially those of us who maybe don't come in as confident, we're afraid to ask questions and look stupid,
Mm.
and we're afraid to take an action and possibly make a mistake. We're second guessing ourselves all the
Yeah.
time. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I think that's great advice. I think that people are too worried to make mistakes, for sure.
you have to. And honestly,
Absolutely.
failure will teach you everything. And not only that, failing can go wonderfully right, and you'll discover like stuff like clipping,
Yeah.
technically wrong, sonically can be awesome.
Yeah.
So the rules, that, yes, learn the rules. When you know the rules, you can artfully break them, you
Absolutely.
know. So,
Absolutely.
but you gotta be willing to
Yeah,
not be
and
confined.
how many great songs have worked out because the guy accidentally played the wrong chord? It's just all those things. You know, you flip the wrong button on the compressor by accident, and it's like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, but like, wow, that really sounds cool. You
Or
know,
like, that's nasty. I love
yeah,
it.
exactly. So I love it.
I work with my husband and I work with a producer, Justin Raisin, who is wonderful in that respect, that he's just completely chaotic and
Mm,
will do anything to just kind of get a sound and a feeling. And the feeling is it always shows up in his work. So I love that I have that kind of playground
for sure.
and people to learn from.
No, that's great. Absolutely. It's so easy to kind of get lose the feeling of especially as somebody that produces and writes my own music. You get so caught up in the, like, you lose the feeling in the production or the engineering. It's like, oh wait, but this, I need more headroom, so I just gotta lower everything. You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe it sounds fine though, and you don't have to listen to all the. So it's funny. It's a funny little thing, the music industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's being your own engineer is, I actually advise against it when you can when you can avoid it,
Mm,
because you have two kind of competing perspectives. And if you're
absolutely.
balanced in your hemisphere, which very few people are, if you're really balanced, then you can pull it off. Like my mentor, Peter, he's the most balanced guy. He's able to stay balanced all the time. If I'm in like micro engineering, editing, fixing everything mode, I cannot just flip a switch and
Mm-hmm.
get back to
Mm,
my artist brain and even what I want in that space. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's you'll get there and you'll get more judicious. And I'm not saying don't do it, because I get it. I do it too. I'm working on my own album right now, doing kind of the same thing. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
luckily I have my husband to kind of help me
Yeah.
with that.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I'm asking
Absolutely.
for it.
Yeah.
But producing and engineering yourself, one thing you got to remember is you're going to see, the curves of your face, you're going to see every blemish.
100%,
Guess
man.
what? At a certain point, you're going to become uncanny valley if you try to just get every single line out of your face, as it were. Like leave yourself in there.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're in there,
I
you
couldn't
know.
agree more. It's so interesting looking back on some of like earlier productions. You spend 6 years on the EQ of the snare that you're like, oh my gosh, it's got to be perfect. Or like what I found really interesting was like doing 100 takes or something because it didn't sound right, or there was a mess up in it, right? And then you go and listen to like a track that's on the radio or anywhere, and you're like, oh, I hear the guy's chair squeak, and I'm like, here I am so worried about this, and this track has 77 million plays, and
Hmm.
like, and here I am. It's like we get so caught up and we're so afraid to make the mistakes that
Right.
or leave the mistakes in there, that
Right.
sometimes people don't even notice.
Here's the thing about being overly perfectionistic. The records that last have character.
Yeah.
And while a perfect record might catch your ear at first and you're like, ooh, your interest in that
Mm.
eventually will wane. I mean, I listened to you. A great example is Since I've Been Loving You by Led Zeppelin. Bonham's kick drum is squeaking. The kick pedal is audibly, annoyingly squeaking that entire time. Doesn't matter. John Lennon gets the words wrong on multiple Beatles songs, and I
Mm.
love it. You know, the
It's
the
really,
the character,
I feel
is
like to
important.
some degree humans are, inevitably flawed in the sense that we're kind of a little bit drawn to drama in the sense of like we things we don't necessarily like, we kind of want to be, sometimes we kind of want to be bothered in
Yeah.
this weird way. So it's funny, we're
Well, it
like,
activates us, right?
yeah, I guess that's a great. Yeah, I guess it's yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's like funny. Sometimes I'll hear a record and be like, oh, I hate that part, and you hear it 3 more times and it becomes your favorite part, and it's just so it's like it's like because you would, I don't know what it is. I guess but it's like you want to. It's like you almost look forward to the mistake, if that makes any
Well,
sense.
you become intrigued. It's
Yeah.
funny. There's an album by Tori Amos called Boys for Pele, and I remember when it came out, I was like, "This is the most self-indulgent piece of what the heck? 18 tracks of this business." I love that record.
Yeah. Yeah.
It actually became one of the foundational records that made me an artist. And it's funny, my initial reaction to that is because there was so much that, like, I was like, like this is requiring me to step into the artist's universe and
Mm-hmm.
out of my own, where
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times music, you want it to put you in your own world and your soundtrack and whatever. No, she was making me come to
Yeah.
Tory Land and deal with the cringiness, but that's like so freaking human
Yeah.
that ultimately it's like you feel more comfortable being yourself,
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, it's like okay to be kind of cringy sometimes, and it's okay to not be perfect.
Yeah, and so many of the classics that we hear, right? Like there was no even option to really even be perfect. Like they kind of embrace, like there was, I'm reading Bob Dylan's biography right now, and it's just interesting to hear him even speaking about some of his favorite, or like as he was growing up, some of his favorite artists in the 40s and 30s, 40s, and 50s,
Yeah.
and like there was barely recording equipment back then. So like even when they
Yeah.
did get a recording, like it was like, or even Bob Dylan, like he was one for like, he's like, I don't want to like do takes in the studio, which the first
Yeah.
take is what you get. It's
Right.
like and it's like that means it wasn't perfect, and he didn't care, and it was just very
Right.
interesting just to think, just to hear like the imperfection, and people love it. you know.
Right. Well, it comes down to what are you trying to capture? Are
Sure.
you trying to capture like this wonderfully curated image,
Sure.
which is again, no one thing is more valid than the other, but the effect that it has is going to be different,
Yeah.
you know? So are you trying to do that, or are you actually trying to document a moment, you know? Like I just
Yeah,
finished a project
absolutely.
with this artist from Singapore, Ainjel, who's a good friend of mine. Um, and we did it all on the fly. We wrote
Yeah.
the songs here in this room. We didn't allow ourselves a lot of luxury of pre-production and thinking it out too much. We just
Mm.
let it be what it is. And now looking back at the process, they're moments. It's a
Yeah.
document, you know, and that's really exciting and it translates, I think, in the overall product
How
at the
many tracks of our favorite artists, they were like, we hear after the fact, you're like, oh, we wrote that in the studio the day of. Like, we weren't planning on recording that one, you know, and that's your favorite, it ends up being your favorite, you know,
it's
it's
your
because
favorite,
the
right?
raw emotion. See, that's the one thing I love about, like, capturing the moments, is, as you said, like, you can only see a portion of it, but this whole wall on the side over here is all Polaroids.
It's
Um,
awesome.
and I love them. Like, I'm obsessed with them because I like the aspect that you're capturing a moment that can't be edited or changed. And like half of them look like terrible because the
Oh,
lighting
I
wasn't
love
right.
terrible Polaroids. They're
But
the best.
yeah, because the lighting wasn't right, or like, you know, you can't see anything. But that makes the ones that like are really good, really, really good. You know, or you can see. I don't know if you can see back here, but I just got a typewriter, a 1940s typewriter, because I love the aspect of like I want to try writing to it because like it's permanent and it's like there's a level of commitment and like if it's imperfect, it's imperfect. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah,
just this level of like we have so many options with our phones and stuff. Like I just started writing again, like in a book, like because there's
right.
the backspace button is I think the creative's you know a crutch, a creative crutch because there's no
Well,
level of
you don't
commitment.
edit while you're writing,
Well, sure, yeah, yeah,
you
but it's
know, but
it's hard to do that
that's
on
the
a computer though.
temptation. Yeah,
But
that's the
it,
temptation of the
well,
computer
exactly. Yeah,
and that.
exactly. It's really easy to edit when you're you know you only have so much page in a you know in a book that's like okay I don't really have room to edit this anymore so I gotta
Right. Well, and there's just again, there's like it's like analog versus digital.
yeah
There's a
yeah
tactile feel to it. I mean, I love that you bring up typewriters. I have one too. I have an old 30s Royale that I love, and it does cause you to write differently. You know, I
sure
think that you should experiment with
yeah
all the different mediums you have available to you to see
mm,
what happens,
yeah
you
yeah
know, within that
absolutely
medium. But definitely the idea of having to kind of commit to what you are writing,
yeah
um, it creates a different sense of urgency, and there's
yeah
something really raw there because you
yeah
can't be performative. You
mm,
just have to be authentic.
yeah. And I think
Yeah.
there's a really cool aspect of like the level of commitment too on all these things. You know, every Polaroid's 60 cents, man. Like I'm almost spending $1 every time oh, this is a bad photo. Oh, there goes $1. You know what I mean? I've spent
Yeah.
quite a few dollars that just look like butt. So you know. But one thing I think that's really interesting, in conclusion, I think is the creative curiosity. I think that I'm also reading Rick Rubin's book. I don't the art of the. I don't know. I'm not sure what it's called. It's the gray book with the circle on it. And one thing he's like talking about that is like art begets art. You know, in the sense of like as an artist, you should really be seeking out the classic movies, the classic records. Go to an art museum. Go to just search for art because in searching
Mhm.
for art, you'll be inspired. And that's kind of like to some degree like why I took the time to go out of my way to the antique shop to just walk through the antique shop to see what inspires me today. Like it's so easy to just kind of get caught in your own day to day and the creative
Yeah. Well, we're data
search.
processing machines. Ultimately, if
Yeah,
you look at what the brain is, it's a
yeah,
data processing machine and a sensory processing machine. So you need to be seeking out data and you need to be
yes,
seeking out
exactly.
sensory experience because that's the thing that tickles and activates your brain and triggers the cascade that becomes the chemicals that become the idea,
Yeah,
you know? So
yeah.
that's important that you immerse yourself. Absolutely. I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Well, what a phenomenal conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you could hang out for 30 more seconds, I want to first of all thank everybody that watched and listened, whatever platform you consumed this piece of content. I really appreciate every single one of you. To make it into the end, definitely go check out everything that Ainjel is up to. All the links will be in the description of whatever platform you're consuming this on. Best way to support this channel is checking out my own original music, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. God bless and peace out.